Gracias, Señor Burgos, for opening today's webinar, and thank you for your technical support. Hi, everybody. This 90-minute webinar is designed as a training and networking opportunity for government, non-governmental organizations, private enterprise, and other stakeholders interested in the sustainable management of food. You may have heard of the food recovery hierarchy. Today, we'll focus on the top tier of the food recovery hierarchy, which is source reduction, reduce the volume of surplus food generated. We'll get started with an introduction to source reduction, and then our special guest speakers from a state agency and the business community will describe examples that prevent wasted food at the source. Our esteemed speakers for today are Ms. Elaine Blatt, Senior Policy and Program Analyst at the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality's Materials Management Program. She's calling in from Portland, Oregon. Ms. Stephanie Barger, Director of Market Transformation and Development for the U.S. Green Building Council's True Zero Waste Program. She's calling in from the Bay Area, California. Mr. Brian Balukonis, Solid Waste Process Owner for the Raytheon Company. He's calling in from Littleton, Massachusetts. Mr. Mark Wincott, District Manager for URES Thompson Hospitality. He's calling in from Dallas, Texas. And me, Mr. Andre Villasenor, Sustainable Management of Food Coordinator at EPA Region 9's Southern California Field Office. I'm calling in from LA. For full bios, please go to our SMM Web Academy website, epa.gov/SMM. Remember to type your questions throughout the webinar, and please take a second to note this disclaimer. And now on to our speakers, starting with your opener, me, Andre Villasenor of EPA. Are you hungry? Want something to munch? My talk is a 5-course meal of soup, an appetizer, salad, the main course, and dessert. Let's start with the hearty bean soup. I'm pleased to share with you EPA's Sustainable Management of Food program, which can help your organization prevent food waste upstream by using a source reduction approach. EPA commenced its food recovery efforts in 2011 with the launch of the Food Recovery Challenge. Since then, we've created a library of food recovery tools and resources for you and engaged with partners across the country. All food photos in these slides are courtesy of the USDA. Since this webinar is brought to you by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, what is our mission? Established in 1970, EPA's mission is to protect human health and the environment. For 46 years, EPA and states have cut air pollution by 70%, ensured that well over 90% of drinking water supplies are in compliance with federal standards, and advanced the diversion of materials from landfill through sustainable materials management, all while our nation's economy has tripled. Finished eating your soup? Let's move on to the appetizer portion of the talk, some scrumptious chips and salsa. What fraction of materials going to U.S. landfills or incinerators is food? With 1/3 of food going uneaten each year, excess food is the single largest type of waste going for disposal each year in the U.S., accounting for over 21% of the American waste stream. Yet just 5% of food waste is currently diverted from landfills. At the retail and consumer levels, the value of food loss and waste in the U.S. is estimated at over $161 billion. The average consumer spends $370 per year on food they will never eat. Meanwhile, almost 1/3 of single-parent households are food insecure. It is estimated that if we recovered only 15% of the food we waste, we could feed 25 million Americans. If the life cycle of excess food were a country, it would be the world's 3rd largest source of greenhouse gas emissions after China and the US. This includes wasted foods upstream and downstream impacts. Finished enjoying your appetizer? Now it's time for the salad portion of this presentation. In 2015, EPA and the U.S. Department of Agriculture announced a national goal to cut wasted food in half by 2030. As part of the effort, the federal government is leading us in a call to action to unify behind this goal. How do we collectively cut food waste in half in the next 13 years? We start with the food recovery hierarchy, which is the main course of this talk. The food recovery hierarchy ranks actions from most preferred to least preferred that organizations can take to prevent and divert surplus food from the landfill or incineration. Therefore, landfill and incineration are the least preferred methods of managing our food excess. Going up the hierarchy, compost by turning food scraps into a valuable soil amendment. Industrial uses include rendering fats, oils, and grease and turning them into products or biofuel. Send food scraps to an anaerobic digester, which captures the methane for use as energy. Divert safe food scraps to animal feed. If you do have unserved surplus, donate fresh, wholesome food to people. A primary goal of the hierarchy is to eliminate the need to manage food as a component of our waste stream through source reduction, which is reducing the volume of surplus food generated. How can you source reduce? One example is tracking which dishes have more leftovers and either making less of the dish or substituting it with a more popular dish. We'll hear more real-life solutions from our other speakers today. The three main benefits of source reduction are reducing your over-purchasing of food, reducing your energy, water, and resource expenses associated with food production and the management of leftover food, and saving on your disposal bills. A United Nations group prepared a report called The Business Case for Reducing Food Loss and Waste. After reviewing 1,200 business sites across 700 companies in 17 countries, the report shows that for every $1 invested in sustainable management of food strategies, like food waste measurement and improved inventory management, $14 are saved through returns such as reduced waste management costs and avoided food purchases. That's a 1,300% return on investment. 99% of the sites evaluated earned a positive return on investment. Are you a restaurant, university, grade school, manufacturer, or grocery store looking to prevent food loss and waste? EPA produced 5 food loss prevention tip sheets for the sectors I've mentioned. Download these tip sheets on the source reduction webpage of EPA's Sustainable Management of Food website. Does your organization want to be part of a larger effort dedicated to food waste prevention? In EPA's Food Recovery Challenge, known as the FRC, organizations improve their sustainable management of food practices and report their results annually. The FRC provides support and public recognition to organizations in following the food recovery hierarchy. Participants track and reduce their uneaten food, while endorsers educate other organizations about the sustainable management of food and the FRC. Currently, over 990 organizations have signed up to take the Food Recovery Challenge. I'm happy to announce that the Oregon DEQ just joined the Food Recovery Challenge as an endorser. Raytheon Company and URest Thompson Hospitality are FRC participants. FRC participants use their own password-protected account in Retrack Connect to report on up to 3 different source reduction activities, as well as donation, anaerobic digestion, and composting. In 2015, FRC participants engaged in source reduction to prevent over 2 million pounds of wasted food. To join the Food Recovery Challenge, your organization can go to epa.gov/Food Recovery Challenge. Are you stuffed? You just devoured a soup, appetizer, salad, and a main course. To culminate your 5-course meal, how about some dessert? Cut your excess food in half by 2030 and save money with these 3 sweet saving solutions. Measure your surplus food and set food waste prevention goals. Implement source reduction solutions and earn recognition by participating in EPA's Food Recovery Challenge. Our source reduction resources are housed in EPA's Sustainable Management of Food website and furtherwithfood.org. You can also contact your EPA regional representative. Take a bite out of food waste now. Bon appetit. At this point, I will see if we have any questions. If you have any questions, you can type them in. Otherwise, you can continue typing in your questions, and we will now go on to Elaine Blatt of the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality.
Hi, thanks, Andre, and hello, everyone. My presentation today has three parts to it. First, I'm going to elaborate a little bit on what Andre just told you, reinforcing the importance of prevention. Second, I'd like to provide an update on Oregon's strategic plan for preventing the wasting of food. And finally, I'll share some compelling examples that I think will help to illustrate the potential of prevention. Next slide, please. So before I actually talk about food, I'd like to talk a little bit about words. This is not so much a case of talking about food waste today as it is talking about wasted food, images of which you see here in the small oval. Wasted food is food that could have been eaten but wasn't. It's all those leftovers you didn't eat, the beautiful berries that molded in the back of your refrigerator, the sandwich you couldn't finish. It's simply the food that could have been eaten but wasn't. Next slide, please. Food waste includes this wasted food I just talked about, but also includes the inedible portions, orange peels, eggshells, coffee grounds, and so forth. In a perfect world, no food would be wasted, and any remaining food waste, the inedible portions, would be recovered via composting or anaerobic digestion. Next slide, please. So as Andre pointed out, prevention or source reduction of wasted food stands at the top of the hierarchy of preferred methods, and this reflects both its significant and environmental and financial benefits. And I just want to elaborate a little bit on what we already heard from Andre. Next slide, please. It's been estimated that anywhere between 25 and 40% of all food grown or imported into the U.S. is never eaten. If all this wasted food were produced in a single farm, it would cover an area 3/4 the size of the state of California. It would consume more water than is used by all farms in Texas, Ohio, and California combined. 1/4 of all fresh water used in this country goes to produce food that is never eaten. Agriculture is the largest user of land and one of the largest sources of water pollution in the U.S. It is also a major source of greenhouse gases and other air pollutants. Next slide, please. Simply put, preventing the wasting of food can reduce the environmental impacts of agriculture in ways that food rescue and recovery through composting and digestion simply can't. According to EPA's WARM tool, landfilling 1 ton of food in an average U.S. landfill results in approximately half a metric ton of greenhouse gases measured in carbon dioxide equivalents, as you can see here on this graph. Next slide, please. Composting or anaerobic digestion both avoid these emissions, as well as reducing emissions by storing carbon in soils or producing biogas that can displace fossil fuel combustion elsewhere. So they provide a big benefit with regard to managing food waste. Next slide, please. But not wasting food in the first place has greenhouse gas reduction benefits that are 6 to 7 times higher per ton than composting or AD, largely because prevention reduces the large upstream impacts of agriculture. In fact, the upstream benefits of prevention may be even higher than shown here, because EPA has based these numbers on average U.S. agricultural production. But food is a globally traded commodity. Global populations are increasing, and with them, demand for food. The amount of land available to produce food is already constrained, so where will additional production come from? Some of it is coming from converting tropical forest to agricultural uses, and this carries a massive carbon footprint not shown on this graph. Making better use of our existing food supplies through waste prevention will allow us to feed more people without these types of big impacts. So these are just a few of the environmental benefits. There are also significant financial benefits as well. For example, wasted food in the U.S. has been valued at as much as $218 billion. Next slide, please. So in EPA's food recovery hierarchy, the placement of source reduction is at the top, above all other strategies, and that's both deliberate and very well justified. We need to focus on the top of the hierarchy through source reduction or prevention. Next slide, please. So that's what we're trying to do here in Oregon with our strategy to prevent the wasting of food, which we published in March of this year. Our strategy was featured in an EPA SMM Web Academy presentation back in January. That recording is still available on EPA's website, and there's also a link here in the document itself. So over the next few minutes, I want to provide a bit of an update on the progress we've made in the last 10 months on several key projects. Next slide, please. One of our major projects, and really a project that's foundational to the rest of our work going forward, is a statewide measurement effort that we are implementing with Portland State University and other partners. Most state and local efforts historically have focused further down the hierarchy, and one reason is that prevention is just not nearly as well understood. We all lack a lot of foundational data, and we also lack methods to measure change over time. We've seen in the United Kingdom, however, that having this foundational data has enabled major policy and programmatic breakthroughs there. So here in Oregon, we're investing in similar research for the rest of this year and into the next. Next slide, please. So here's a rough overview of our research, which consists of 5 phases, which all build on each other in much the same way as Russian nesting dolls. The first 2, qualitative interviews and a statewide quantitative survey, have both been completed and results are published on our website. The 3rd and 4th tasks are currently underway. Task 3 involves an intensive study of wasted food in approximately 225 households in a variety of communities, and this includes food diaries, household level waste sorts, and pre and post surveys. We're currently in the middle of that task. Task 4 involves testing a variety of different practices in 15 institutional and commercial food service operations. And we're currently in the middle of that task as well. And when we're completed, we expect to have many more case studies to share than the few I'll share with you later today. Next slide, please. One of the findings of this early research is causing us to question the popular wisdom that composting is the gateway to source reduction. What we found so far is that some households report that the act of composting instead of throwing food in the trash alleviates the guilt associated with discarding food, and this may result in increased generation of wasted food. This hypothesis is further supported by evidence from a field experiment recently published by researchers at The Ohio State University. What it appears is that the compost bin is viewed very differently from the trash container. People told us in qualitative interviews that if they compost food, they feel like they're not wasting it. So now, while Oregon absolutely supports composting, there is clearly a need to find better ways to message both of these solutions while ensuring that we start with preventing waste in the first place. Next year, we have planned some additional research to do quantitative message testing to explore this dynamic and try to figure out the best way to communicate prevention and recovery together. Next slide, please. Legislation here in Oregon in 2015 created some new waste prevention and reuse requirements that will start to apply to larger cities and counties on January 1st of 2018. These requirements are modeled after our state recycling requirements and require cities and counties to implement a number of projects drawn from a menu of options. One of the options that they can choose from involves commercial waste prevention outreach. To assist in this pathway, Oregon DEQ just published a resource toolkit that local governments can use to conduct outreach to businesses. This toolkit, Wasted Food, Wasted Money, is a public awareness campaign aimed at Oregon restaurants, grocery stores, and commercial food service providers. The program provides tracking tools, guidelines, and resources to help these businesses save money and reduce wasted food. And you can view it at the link provided here on this slide. After we complete the messaging research next year, we'll also produce a similar campaign toolkit for household and residential outreach. Next slide, please. Another area that we have been working in the state of Oregon is around grants, and we made a change this year to reorient our grants program to more explicitly support true source reduction projects. Our grant program is not particularly large. We offered about $600,000 in competitive grants this year. In its 22-year history, our program has awarded 334 grants, and only one of these explicitly focused on preventing the wasting of food. In contrast, we've funded to date 24 different edible food rescue projects. So this year, when we announced the grant solicitation, we indicated that we would award extra points for projects that focus on the prevention of wasted food. And as a result of those extra points, we actually generated 7 applications this year that out of 34 total that had a meaningful focus on the source reduction of food. And while unfortunately I can't announce the awards right now because we won't make them until the end of this month, the quality of those projects suggests to us that several of them are likely to be funded. Next slide, please. So moving into the third part of my presentation, before I move on to the third part of my presentation, I also wanted to talk about the fact that we recently completed a related project with the University of Michigan that reviewed hundreds of published life cycle assessments specific to food and summarized the results for 7 specific food types and 2 cross-cutting issues. One of those is studying the relationship between packaging and wasted food. And in this paper, we offer a framework for understanding when additional packaging may in fact be justified. That is, where the environmental burden of additional packaging is more than compensated by reduced upstream impacts associated with less wasted food. If you want an introduction to this dynamic, I think our paper does a really nice job summarizing it. You can find it alongside the other papers addressing transportation, coffee, beer, wine, tomatoes, and other foods at the website indicated here. Mark, Brian, and Stephanie are all going to share some specific examples of source reduction in individual businesses. But in my remaining time, I'd like to move on to a few other case study examples that I think will help illustrate the benefits and variety of options available. Next slide, please. So pre-consumer waste is the kitchen waste that occurs before food even reaches a guest and results from overproduction, spoilage, expiration, and trimmings. It's waste that's within the control of the food service operator and can be prevented. Pre-consumer waste has 0 value and costs far more than the cost of disposal when you consider food costs, energy, and water. So Aramark, the big institutional food service business, and an EPA Food Recovery Challenge participant, saw a 50% reduction in its overall food waste through a pilot program that includes implementation of trayless dining, daily measurement using LeanPath software, staff training, and the purchase of imperfect produce. Next slide, please. So Aramark's results shouldn't be surprising. In 2010, DEQ partnered with Intel and Bon Appetit, another large institutional food service provider, and the food service provider for Intel at the time, to pilot daily food waste tracking and staff training for a year at 2 Intel cafes here in Oregon. During that time, participating sites collectively reduced pre-consumer food waste by 47% and per meal food costs by 13.2%. The sites were able to reduce food waste and food costs while better estimating consumer demand and adjusting production accordingly, minimizing trim waste and pre-production losses through training, involving staff in brainstorming creative solutions. These solutions included reusing vegetable trim and creating soup stocks, reworking unused fruit into chutneys and sauces, moving to a batch-oriented production model for pizzas, pureeing leftover potato products for thickeners in other foods, changing to smaller display bowls at the salad bar, and switching the deli station from self-serve to a staffed station. Next slide, please. Moving out of the United States briefly, another fun example comes from Baxter Story, a large independent hospitality service provider in the UK. The company has been tracking plate, production, and spoilage waste across its sites and has reduced its overall waste of food by 37%. They also shared best practices. For example, they found that by simply using a vegetable peeler rather than a knife to peel butternut squash, they could reduce squash waste by 88% and get 12 servings from a typical squash rather than the previous 10. Next slide, please. Here in the Portland area, a pilot project that DEQ sponsored worked with 3 elementary schools that pilot tested food choices, that is, letting kids choose from a variety of foods as opposed to all being served with the same plate of food. Total cafeteria waste using that method dropped 28, 15, and 14% at the 3 schools. At one school, the amount of food waste per lunch served fell nearly 50%. And as a result of I think, awareness raised among the kids, even brown baggers got in on the action, cutting their waste between 10 and 13%. There have also been a number of studies showing that scheduling recess before lunch in elementary schools not only reduces food waste, but also leads to improved nutritional outcomes and improved student behavior in the cafeteria, on the playground, and in the classroom. Next slide, please. Switching away from food service to manufacturing, the Provision Coalition in Canada has recently released a food loss and waste toolkit that manufacturers can use to identify root causes of waste and solutions to reduce it. For example, Calgary Italian Bakery used the tool and found that 49% of all waste was from their bread line, and that more than half of this waste was due to crushing at the bread slicer and bagger. They determined that fixing this could save them $63,000 annually. English muffins were found to be another source of wasted food, and about half this waste was because the muffins came out deformed, undersized, and misshapen. So focusing on the forming process and the conveyance of dough prior to the proofing process and a possible equipment upgrade could improve the product consistency and save up to $31,000 a year. Next slide, please. My last example involves grocery stores, where ReFed has estimated that the U.S. food retail sector generates 8 million tons of waste a year, or $18 billion in lost value. Some retailers are honing in on source reduction as a way to reduce shrink, or the amount of unsold food in their stores. For example, Hannaford Supermarkets in the Northeast has set prevention targets and has been tracking tons of food waste per sale continuously since 2008. As an example of a process change, a few years ago, Hannaford changed from every other day produce deliveries to daily deliveries. This results in more accurate ordering, less waste, and improved quality. Computer-assisted ordering has improved inventory management and has reduced Hannaford's waste of bagged salads by 50%. Next slide, please. So I hope these examples have helped to illustrate the wide variety of opportunities that exist for source reduction of wasted food. There is no proverbial silver bullet, and although what these successful organizations have in common is a commitment to prevent waste at the source, to track the amount of food wasted, and to use this information as intelligence to inform changes in processes, changes that not only reduce waste and protect the environment, but also improve customer experiences and save money. Thank you for your attention, and I believe I can take a few questions now.
Yes, thank you very much, Elaine, for that great presentation, and also thank you for stepping in for David Alloway, who was originally scheduled to speak and wasn't able to make it. So yeah, we'll ask you maybe one question, and then if we have time, we can do some more questions at the end. There is a question here asking how willing are household participants in Oregon, how willing are they to respond to your surveys, and how accurate, viable are the results?
That is a really good question. So we're kind of in the middle of this particular piece of the research, and it's been led by my colleague Ashley Zanoli, and she could probably give you a lot more details than I will be able to. But what I can tell you is that recruitment was for this study was a bit of a challenge because we're requiring a lot out of people, and we've had some dropouts, but we're getting pretty decent response, and we're pretty confident, particularly because we're recruiting 225 households, that at the end of the effort we're going to have some really good data about household behaviors.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Stephanie Barger of the U.S. Green Building Council's True Zero Waste Program.
Great. Thank you, Andre, and great presentation, Elaine. Good morning to everybody, or afternoon, depending on where you're at. So as Andre said, I'm with the U.S. Green Building Council. Under our GBCI, which is the Green Business Certification, Inc., we have several certification programs. One of the newest ones is TRUE, which stands for Total Resource Use and Efficiency. And we rebranded this for a couple of reasons. Number one, because really that's what we want to focus on, and zero waste is all about the use of your resources and how efficient your company is. I'm going to review a little bit of our certification program and then move into the nuts and bolts of training your employees. Next slide. So True Zero Waste certification was designed to help people really quantify and understand how much they are wasting, pursue ways to reduce this, and also understand the impact of our wastefulness on cutting carbon emissions and supporting public health. Next. This is an overview of our True Zero Waste rating system, and the focus is, of course, on reduction and reuse versus just on recycling and composting. And this is done through thoroughly analyzing your waste, training employees, leadership from companies, and upstream management, including zero waste purchasing and reporting guidelines. Next. So we talk about going beyond recycling, and I'm going to share some more resources. This is actually a slide from Toyota on their reusable shipping containers and how much money can be saved. We're going to focus on today rethinking and retraining. But the main thing with reducing and reusing is the amount of money that can be saved or made. So if you're looking for ways to finance maybe some food prevention opportunities, is really looking at what you can do to reduce and reuse your packaging and overall production and materials. Next. So, I apologize. This didn't come up correctly. This is supposed to be showing how when we normally do a waste audit, we sort our trash and we sort it into composting and recycling, which is important, and we need to know what we don't know. So sorting is critical. However, the overall goal of a zero waste audit is to eliminate not only your trash bin, but also your recycling and your composting bin. And today we're talking specifically about food reduction. And as Elaine said, a lot of people feel good about composting, but it's not a solution. And from the business case, that is a lot of money wasted and a lot of employee time wasted. And so the cost is not only what it's costing you to compost, but all of those upstream costs and resources. Next. So part of what we want to do is observe, interview, and survey employees. You can have the best policies and practices in place, but it's most important to look and see if anybody's actually doing what you've asked them to do. So a couple of simple examples is you can look out into your cafeteria, and are employees taking the reusables, or are they all taking the disposables? How much food is actually left on their plates? And this can really help you train and engage your employees to participate with your kitchen staff and your chefs on ways to actually reduce. And we've mentioned some prior to, as far as smaller plates or more choices that allows them to choose what they want versus plates that are already set. And then actually going through your bins. We've done, in fact, Andre and I have done several zero waste audits at sites, and what we find is food is coming in from outside sources or working with athletic teams. The coach's main priority is to make sure his team members are fed, and that can lead to a lot of food waste. So really, once again, engaging everybody in the process and how can your teams get the nutrition they need but also understand the impact that they have upstream and downstream from wasting. Interviewing is key to understand what motivates people. Some people do not care about the environment, but might have a big concern for health, social, and economic issues. And then surveying, the great thing with working within your company is you have a lot more control than working in a community. So the secret is a short time frame and turning around your surveys, and then also having it sent out by your CEO. We've had a 90 to 95% return rate when we've only provided employees a 2 to 3 day turnaround, and the survey was sent out by the CEO or the owner of the company. Usually our surveys, they're a survey on their environmental literacy. So what do they know? There's a lot of confusion out there. What do they do? And what do they want to do? And how do they want to be communicated? Next. So the most important thing is to give them a reason. So with your zero waste outreach and promotion, and once again, you can gain a lot of that from your surveys and what's important to them, not what's important to you. And then training is 100%. So even though you might be thinking of your kitchen staff, it might be just as critical to train your janitorial, your employees, your customers, and get them all engaged. And of course, everybody's on the green team. And it'll be interesting who your champions will be out of your surveys and observation. Sometimes it's not the person that's the greenest or caring the most about the environment, but actually knows how to work with your employees and vendors. Next. So how did we get here? We were taught to be a throwaway society, and as we know, many of our restaurants perpetuate that of giving us as much and anything that we need, and then we leave half that food on the plate. So, we really have some heavy lifting as far as changing mindsets in our current culture. So I wanted to provide some resources for you to educate your employees or work with your communities. And of course, EPA, I have to continually give a shout out for all the work that they are doing and their availability to work with you on site with your employees and with your community. So please utilize all the resources that EPA and the staff is able to provide. Right here, there is a slide from Disney where they switch from compostable materials to reusable for their dining. They were utilizing 725,000 disposables every year. And I think what's key here, because we're talking about food waste prevention, if you're using compostables, that is part of farming and that is part of food. So we're either using materials that could be food or we're destroying the natural environment that is food to our wildlife. Next slide. And I bring up the zero waste economy for a couple of reasons. It's always important to understand what's available. And as we'll hear from our other presenters, do you have local farms that you work with? Is there organic farming available? Is there food markets that you can utilize or farmers markets that you can utilize, and what's available? So it's always great to do a scan of what's there and engaging with your local municipalities, and then more importantly, being the leader and helping everybody in your community to create these resources. Next. And this is just a simple training exercise to engage everybody. And one fun activity is when you break people into small groups, is actually have them put on a different hat of what they do in their company or in the community, and they get a whole different perspective. Next slide. And of course, we want to start where the trash is starting. So a lot of this is thinking about your cafeteria, but your employees are also bringing in food. And there might be, kitchenettes and everything. So looking through your whole entire business and understanding where the food waste is happening, and it might be coming from outside sources. Next. And that's just an overview of the 9 points of generation and where you can look. I also encourage you with your grounds to actually produce food on your landscape, within your landscape of your business. There's great opportunities to grow fruit trees instead of regular trees. If you're not using that within your own facility, it's donating that to the community. Next. And so with the training and with your promotion is developing some fun art. So here's a few of them, but I'm sure through food waste prevention you can find even more. Next. And this is more about training and communicating. What's great is most of our businesses now have screens throughout, either in the conference rooms or even through the general areas. And it's a great way to remind your employees and your customers about opportunities to prevent food waste and great ways to donate and just reduce overall consumption. Next. And then partnering with your suppliers. I think there's a perception out there that the suppliers don't want to help you meet your sustainability goals or aren't working on that themselves. And what we find is more and more vendors are working with it. In fact, most of our large food service vendors, this is a high priority for them. So really collaborate with them upstream and downstream and join together to reduce our food waste. Next. And developing your zero waste goals. So once again, it's not only about reducing your landfill and waste to energy, but it's about environmental health and saving money. And I think for businesses, if you think this is a heavy lift or you don't have the time, it's really looking at how much money can be saved from reducing your food waste and, more importantly, reusing your food waste. Whole Foods Markets has done an amazing job of, instead of throwing away or composting their food waste, is pulling it a day or two ahead of time and utilizing it within their bakeries and prepared food. And in fact, they don't really buy any food for their bakeries in their prepared food because they actually pull it on the shelf prior to it being wasted. Next slide. And for all of us, if you're not for zero waste, how much are you for? Next slide. Here's how to get in contact with me, and would love to engage with all of you and create a zero waste economy.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for those wonderful words of wisdom and telling us all about the True Zero Waste program. Some people have asked if these presentation slides and recording will be available after the webinar. We do plan to post the recorded webinar to epa.gov/SMM within a couple of weeks. And also the handouts are available. If you look on the GoToWebinar box, you can download them right now. One quick question for Stephanie. Question is, you said employees reduced waste by 98% 2 to 3 days after an email from the CEO about reducing waste. Did you do any follow-up in the medium or long term to see if employees kept those habits?
So it wasn't the reduced waste, they returned the survey within 2 or 3 days. So usually your survey return rate is only maybe 15 or 20%. And yes, you want to encourage your company to continually conduct surveys. And really through our certification program, that is very well documented and it's instilled in the process. That's also why you need to continually look at your trash bins inside and out. It's a great filter to see how well your training is going and where you need to refocus training if it's slipping and you're creating more food waste than before.
Okay, great. And somebody else asked, what do the letters KPI stand for?
That's your performance index. So what companies are doing is continually tracking on a daily or weekly or monthly basis how well they're doing with their zero waste goals, their composting goals, their food reduction goals. And that's why, you know, having these TV screens interactive screens. You can put information up there quickly and be very transparent with your employees and your customers.
Well, thank you very much, Stephanie. We are now going to go on to our next speaker, Brian Balukonis of the Raytheon Company.
All right. Well, thank you, Andre and Stephanie and everyone else. All good stuff. And I am going to talk about Raytheon's Food Recovery Challenge partnership. So I'm really going to focus on a kind of an innovative way for businesses to participate in the Food Recovery Challenge, which obviously includes the prevention of food waste and source reduction. You have to remember that most businesses do not actually run or operate the dining centers at their locations. They source it out to other suppliers. So, and it ultimately makes it more challenging for the business to focus on source reduction on food waste. So I think we have a innovative way to address that. So next slide, please. So if anyone doesn't know who Raytheon is, we're a very large defense contractor, an international company centered in corporate headquarters in Waltham, Mass. And we, or my responsibility with the company is basically to focus on making the sites and the processes that we use as green as possible. So a lot of my focus over the last 15 years has been with zero waste. So next slide, please. So for agenda, I'm going to just go over our sustainability goals and how those goals actually focus ultimately on food waste and source reduction, and talk about our partnership with UREST, who's our food service provider across our business, and just focus on a couple of sample programs. And then I'm going to really throw it over to Mark, who's going to talk about a lot more of the specifics of the programs at Raytheon. Next. So as I said, we're very driven by goals. So we have a set of 2020 sustainability goals. And there's really 3 goals that impact the Food Recovery Challenge and source reduction. You know, that's our solid waste diversion rate, our supplier packaging reduction goal, and ultimately the which I would kind of refer to as our overarching goal is zero waste certification. So we have a goal to certify 20 sites zero waste by the year 2020. Next slide, please. And as Stephanie went over all the details of the True program, I just have one slide here to just to, again, focus on how the True program impacts or addresses food waste and source reduction. You know, there's, as Stephanie said, there's many questions associated with the rating system, and there are several that go back to food waste and how you can get points in the True system. One is if you donate food. Another is if you pursue the highest and best use of waste materials, which can be food, and then tracking material flow in the dining centers to ultimately eliminate waste. And so Raytheon's actually achieved out of that the 2020 goal. We do have 6 sites certified now by the GBCI, and we still have 14 more in the queue for 2020. But I guess the point is, you know, this is something we've been doing for a long time, and why we do it, we really like to say it's just the right thing to do. But more importantly, it's a huge program, and we just can't do it alone. We need to partner with others. So next slide, please. So again, one of the real big keys with our zero waste program is our partnership with UREST. You know, and we do that both in a formal and kind of an informal way. You know, we do have sustainability language that's directly in our enterprise agreement with UREST to focus on sustainability and waste and food waste reduction. But we also have these kind of informal things we've kind of just developed over the last 10 or 12 years. And one is we actually have an annual summit with UREST, and you know, we call it a safety and sustainability summit. And we kind of review what we've done over the past year and where we want to go in the next year. And that kind of helps us develop a roadway for future successes. And actually, how the Food Recovery Challenge partnership really began was at one of these summits where we discussed the opportunity. Again, you know, Raytheon is not cooking the food in the dining centers, UREST is. So, you know, our way of achieving the goals of the Food Recovery Challenge was, you know, to develop this partnership. So next slide, please. So going back to a couple programs, you know, again, we've been doing this for a long time. And again, I'm just kind of focused on, this isn't necessarily, you know, source reduction in the sense of the main dining center per se, back of the house, but we created a program called Serving Up Sustainability, and this really, again, emphasized reusable dining ware. In the past, we used to use a lot of polystyrene. We basically eliminated polystyrene and really focused on reusable dining ware. And if we had to do to-go items, they would be compostable. So again, an improvement of what we had. Next slide, please. Again, and these are key programs that, you know, we developed. We had this partnership together in order to achieve what we did achieve. And the second program really was based off success with the first program, and that was our, you know, our what we refer to as zero office waste program. And it really focused on two streams, this recycle stream and a compost stream, which, from the dining center standpoint, you know, we work closely with UREST, and it's the front of the house, the back of the house. Yeah, we did a lot of composting too in 2016. Again, still opportunities. We're still working it with UREST, but you know, this was another step forward in the process, and you know, still looking at the hierarchy to see how we could, you know, continue to reduce our waste. So that eliminated trash in our dining centers in New England. So that was, again, a big step. So next slide, please. So this is my favorite slide. And have we reached the summit? So, you know, we're still working on this. If you can't notice, I'm a climber, and I finish all my presentations on the climbing slide. And again, you know, we're still climbing, we're still working on this program. And again, I think a lot of the successes Mark will talk about next is how, again, our relationship and how we partnered and how we made a lot more great progress on the Food Recovery Challenge. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Andre.
Thank you, Brian, for sharing that information. We do have a question for you. It has a couple of abbreviated words here. Maybe you'll know what they are. The question is, can people return their compostable takeout clamshells, etc., to the office for composting, as putting those compostables in an LF is not necessarily better outcome than using PS?
Well, what I can say is, yeah, I was going to say what I can say is we are working on, in conjunction with yours, a new program for reusable clamshells that would eliminate or greatly reduce compostable clamshells, which we presently are using. So those returnables, again, would be used by the employee population, and once they're used, they would be returned back to the dining center for cleaning, and the process would continue. So that would ultimately reduce waste and food-related waste, which presently is composted.
Okay, great. We have another question for you as well. How does the energy and resource use of using reusables, like through dishwashing, etc., compare to that of using compostables?
Well, you know, obviously there is energy used, both water and heat for cleaning. We had actually looked at studies that were done by the EPA before we really kicked off the Serving Up Sustainability program, and the end results were, you know, there is impacts, but the overall impact is less and an improvement from a carbon standpoint also. So that's the reason why we proceeded on that program.
Okay, and the final question, how were you able to get employees to make their behavioral changes to get on board with the program?
Well, I can say it's not a perfect world. We've been doing this for, you know, this program for close to 20 years. You know, we have an incredible amount of communication. We've done videos. Actually, Stephanie has actually helped us develop some formal educational slides that we provide. Matter of fact, everyone talks about the 3 R's. Well, in the zero waste world, it's actually 12 R's. So we actually have, you know, one of those R slides every month that we discuss to keep the program fresh and ongoing. You know, we do training. We have enterprise zero waste training. It's an annual requirement for many people within the facilities world. So all the tradespeople, we do training annually for the URES people. So there's a lot of training, a lot of communication. You know, we do audits every year of our materials, you know, dumpster dive type audits to see how effective the programs are. Always opportunities. We're always making improvements, and you know, let's just say it's every day it gets better, and you know, if we just continue to work on the progress.
Please keep your questions coming in by going to the GoToWebinar box, questions. We will culminate the webinar with Mark Wincott of URES Thompson Hospitality.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So I'm going to sort of round off Brian's presentation, some of the processes that we currently do in our business in URES generally, and also at Raytheon. So next slide, please.
Mark, there's a little bit of vibrating in your voice or in the sound of your telephone.
All right, let me make a switch here. Give me 1 second. How's
that any better?
Yes, that's much better.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, our reduction program, very similar to the pyramid. Awareness. So awareness is both for our customers and for our associates, but this particular awareness is really for our customers. We use signage, love food, not waste, throughout the cafeterias. Try to get folks to take what they're going to eat, not what their eyes are looking at. And we run programs throughout the year that really help harness that. Reduce, we have a program called Waste Not, which I'll get into in a moment, and that is really for our associates. It starts the minute the food hits the table and they start production, and I'll explain a little bit further. And then recovery, food that we're not able to recycle into other dishes, what do we do with that? So if it's something that we can donate, and that kind of goes into the recovery challenge, we are working that process in some of the sites at Raytheon and Mass, and we're expanding that this year across the country. So next slide, please. So the Waste Not program, which actually Andre kind of covered some of this earlier, it's really how we get our associates to be more aware of what they're doing while they're in production. So we share very similar information before about how much food we waste as general population, in our own homes. 20% of the food that we purchase doesn't get eaten. 19% of us throw away food too soon, even though it's not to date. We still throw it away because we're worried and we're concerned. And then each of us tosses away nearly 300 pounds of food. And we like to share that with the associates to kind of give them an idea of, what's happening everywhere, not just in our world in the kitchens, at work, but for us, a 2% reduction of waste in our business equates to $68 million in food cost savings. So that's kind of an impactful way for us to get that point across to them when we're beginning the training process of this program. Next slide, please. So we currently have over 950 accounts that are live on the program. We probably have a little bit more by this point, but within the first month of getting the program underway, we've reduced our waste by 5%. And then a good backstory to that is we had a program previous to this. It was called Trim Tracks. And both programs work the same. So it starts the minute they start production. If they peel this outer skin of an onion, or they peel a watermelon, that doesn't get discarded into a garbage can. It goes into a plastic bucket. So anything that they're not able to utilize, whether it's produce, proteins, etc., whatever they can't utilize in the dish goes into this bucket. And then at the end of the day, the bucket is weighed. We assign a dollar value for every quart or pound, and then we're able to track our waste, if you will, from a production standpoint. When we rolled out the original program, we had great reduction because it really brought to the forefront what they can do differently. Do you have to peel that much of the cantaloupe? Peppers, don't just cut off the 4 great sides of the pepper. The top and the bottom can be utilized as well. So it's really more of an educational piece. So a 5% reduction over our previous reduction is actually a really strong number. What we do now with this Waste Not program is it actually tracks by station. The previous program just tracked the entire cafeteria. So each station has their own tracking. It tracks their production, so it tracks any of their, the peels, the ends that don't go into a dish, anything that's overproduced that can't be recycled into another dish goes into the bucket, and then any items that are out of date will also go into the bucket. And now that it's down to each station, each one of the associates is assigned to their station, is tracking that information on their own. So they're able to see how they're doing day over day, year over year, and you can see the trends. Obviously in the summer with lots of watermelons, those particular stations, their numbers are a little bit up, but the trend is there. It's a great way for us to see where we're headed. We're also able to track the recycling, composting, and food recovery challenge data where we're using it. So it's implemented into each one of the areas, and then the data, like I said, is converted into pounds, and then we share that information on a weekly basis with the team, so they're able to see where they are, and it's also a great way for us to see how we're trending against our other sites, and if someone's having much more success, how are they having such success, and we share that information with each other. Next slide, please. So this is just a little bit of information on the recovery challenge that that we're doing at the 2 sites in Mass. We're just shy of 1,900 pounds currently, and we're about to add on more sites across the country. So we look forward to having some good improvements on that. Next slide, please. So one of our other programs is Imperfectly Delicious Produce, which is a program that was started by our sister company, Bon Appetit. And it's a program that utilizes produce that would normally go to waste, whether it's going to be discarded via waste or it's going to go composting. I'll get a little bit further into the details on the next slide. So the objective is to get the food that would typically be discarded. As I said, it's not grade A. It doesn't have a great look, but the produce is certainly viable, and it's stuff that would have been thrown away or just left in the fields to compost, and we're getting it into cooking. So it's certainly worthy of going into a dish. It just might not have the look of a grade A vegetable or fruit, but once you slice, dice, and put it into a dish, it works fantastically. Next slide, please. So when we waste food that they're growing, the obviously concern is the resources that went into growing that particular item. So now we're not wasting the resources that are being utilized. The food that would typically be going to landfills, if that's where it's headed, certainly emit the methane, or if it's going into composting, you know, it's certainly wasted resources to grow that particular item. And the farmers are losing money for all the resources that they spent, and a lot of them are also having to pay to have that particular item that's not being sold to the market because it's not a perfectly looking produce item, discarded. Next slide, please. So some of the examples of items that would not typically be sold: scarred lemons, misshaped squash, oddly shaped eggplant. So these are, I mean, these, if you're looking at these items here, they look fine, right? I mean, it's not something that you buy at the grocery store because it's not going to make it to the grocery store. But now, instead of being diverted to trash or composting, we're able to purchase these items. Next slide, please. So again, right, it's not produce that is that's going bad or severely damaged. It's quality product that's going to waste because it doesn't meet the good looking vegetable, but the flavors are still there, the safety is there as well. The chefs have total authority to refuse any of the produce when it arrives if it doesn't meet our QA standards, and that is one of the best parts for us, is that we do have a QA department in our organization, and anything that we're purchasing from any vendor goes through a stringent process, and it's you know, this is not one that doesn't go to the wayside as well. It's important that purchases are made through the supplier house in order to be able to trace the product back to the farmer, and that really ties back to our QA standards. Next slide, please. So the imperfectly delicious produce, it's often just as good as grade A product. It's really hard to tell the difference, as I said, right? Because we're slicing and dicing or putting into the dish. So a carrot that might look straight and perfect, you get one that looks like a horseshoe. Once it's peeled and put into a soup, you would never know. The program has enabled us to afford organic, local produce that we might not have been able to purchase otherwise, just due to some of the high cost. And it's really easy to incorporate the product into our menus. And we really are glad to make a difference for the farmers. Anything that we can do to help them save on resources, not discard product, certainly benefits them and it benefits us. Next slide, please. So cosmetically perfect produce, it's not essential for food, as I mentioned. Like I said, it's being sliced, diced, it's being put into dishes. Through this program, we encourage our distributors and farmers to identify opportunities to rescue product from going to waste. And we focus on produce with random sizing, specs, color, not damaged or bruised. And it's really been a great program for us. So that is what I have.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mark. We do have a couple questions for you before we open it up for questions for all of our speakers. Do you know how much produce is wasted on account of being imperfect or ugly?
I do not have that readily available.
Okay.
I can tell you that when they first rolled this program out, at one farm they showed 1 month, and it was a heaping pile, and that was one farm. So I don't know what the numbers are off the top of my head, but it's a lot.
Okay. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the internal tracking tool that you all developed? How did you develop it? Did you build it yourself?
So, yeah, it's an internally developed program, and what it does is it's an Excel-based program. Now it's a web-based, but you're essentially entering in data by quarts and pounds, and that's converting into dollars. So then that way, what we're doing is we're sort of creating a baseline, right? And once we have the baseline, then we're really able to see how we're trending, if we're improving or not improving. And the paraphernalia that we use to share with the associates, the one slide that I shared was really just an eye-opening conversation to have with the associates. And then we go into further details as far as training them on how to use the buckets, how to measure, how to weigh, and then what to do at the end, right? Because if we're at a site that's doing composting, those buckets go straight into the composting bins as opposed to trash.
Okay, and then speaking of the composting bins and the buckets, do you use a compostable liner to line your buckets when collecting food waste?
If we're on a compostable program, yes.
Okay. So I'm going to open it up now. I'm going to kind of I have some questions that are for some certain speakers and others that are kind of wide open for anybody that wants to answer them. Stephanie, are you still on the line?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. We had a comment here from somebody asking if composting and recycling, is that really zero waste, or is it only zero waste if we're preventing?
So our diversion tracking counts reduction, reuse, recycling, and composting. And you take all of that with your trash, and that provides you with your diversion number. Our minimum requirement for certification is 90% diversion from landfill, incineration, waste energy, and the environment. And what I think is most important is track everything. Track your reduction, reuse, because you're going to see how much money you're saving and how much employee time, and that's what's most important along with getting certified.
Thank you. Mark, what type of food is UREST donating to hunger relief?
So the majority of the food that we're donating it's a Friday afternoon. It's at the end of the week, and it's product that won't sustain the weekend to be reutilized. Probably 80% of it is salad bar items. So we have a large salad bar, 20 different crudité items, composed salads. So all those items are being donated, and then any bread that was previously frozen, that's not going to hold the weekend, is also being donated. You know, what happens is over time, right, we work on our systems. So when I started with the company 20 years ago, we would put the food in the oven, get it cooked, and have it ready to go at 9 o'clock in the morning. Now what we're doing is we're cooking as needed. So we're cooking in batches. That's over time has certainly reduced the amount of food that we're not able to reutilize. So that's really why it's the salad bar. That's really the bulk of what we're donating, along with bread and pastry products.
Thank you. There's a question here I can answer. The question is there a fee to use Retract Connect? I had mentioned Retract Connect is the database that FRC participants and endorsers use. It is free to use when an organization joins the Food Recovery Challenge. So that is the benefit. One of the benefits of joining the Food Recovery Challenge is they get their own password protected account to Retract Connect. Question for Elaine. How does having recess before lunch reduce food waste?
Having recess before lunch means I'm not, first of all, I'll just say this is not a study that I was involved in, but having recess before lunch means that kids go out, they run around, their appetites are enhanced. And so when they come in from recess, they're actually more likely to finish their lunch.
And I can add that too, Andre. It also means they're more focused because they're very fidgety if they go straight from their classroom to the lunchroom and they're not focused on eating. And so exercise actually calms them down along with getting that energy out and creating an appetite.
Thank you. Here's a question for any one of the speakers that would like to answer it. Are there efforts to create a nationwide uniform food waste reduction program / format of data submission?
I would say that's really what EPA is trying to do through the Food Recovery Challenge, WasteWise, WARM model, and the Portfolio Manager. We're all encouraging everybody to participate in those programs. Along with that, I know reset.com also is collecting a lot of database information.
I was just going to add that, from a business standpoint, we're trying to standardize how we collect and what we collect for metrics across the company. So we're all reporting the same things in the same manner. So we're really focusing on standardization also.
And I'll just add that here in the state of Oregon, this large foundational measurement project that we're engaged in is intended, obviously, first and foremost, to help us get a handle around what's really going on with the amount and loss reasons around wasted food. But we're also hoping that the ultimate results of that project could serve as a model for other states across the nation who are trying to measure and understand their wasted food.
Thank you. Another question. From the studies mentioned about the quantities of food waste in the U.S. waste stream, has any study been done on how much of that food is actually edible food rather than just scraps? Who would like to answer that question?
I don't have the answer for the study. This is Stephanie, but I think, even what I would say is very anecdotally, look in your own refrigerator and your cupboards and what you're throwing out. So I think even what Mark was saying with Urist is, what were the farmers leaving on the land with the imperfect food? What have they found by cooking in batches and what they're able to donate? So anecdotally, just having been working with companies and communities, it's probably close to 70 to 80 that, if properly handled, could be food for people and food for animals. Animals, they'll eat a lot of these scraps. Not banana peels, but apple peels and a lot of that. Animals will eat that, and that's another food opportunity.
Thank you. There's a question here. I can provide the first answer, and then anybody that has additional information. The question is, do you have any consumer guides for reducing household waste? The EPA does have a guide. It's called Food, Too Good to Waste, Food, Too Good to Waste, and that is available on EPA Sustainable Management of Food website, and that contains a guide and toolkit specifically on reducing residential food waste. Anybody else? Oregon Department of Environmental Quality?
Yeah, there are a number of other resources out there. I can't quote them all off the top of my head, but our intention, once we have completed our work on this messaging study that I talked about in my presentation, is also to try to develop some of our own materials. The EPA materials, Food Too Good to Waste, are actually really quite good, and a number of communities in our state are using them.
And Andre, also say NRDC, Dana has her incredible book, I think it's called The Wasteless Kitchen. That's an amazing resource for using at your household. I might have the title wrong, but we can provide that to everybody.
Right, and a number of jurisdictions, counties, have actually adapted the EPA Food Too Good to Waste toolkit, and many of them have made available those guides on their websites for free. You can actually go to an EPA tool. It's called EPA Managing and Transforming Waste Streams tool, and that contains examples of local governments throughout the country that have both residential and commercial food waste programs. Here's another question for Elaine. Has Oregon considered a food to landfill ban as other states have?
We have not gone down that path. What I can tell you is right now the Portland metropolitan area, our metro regional government, is in fact in the process of reviewing and developing a ban on organics that would apply to commercial food service operations. And it's a complicated question, and we haven't gone down that path as a state yet.
I can just add that Massachusetts does have a ban on food waste that's been really effective, I think, in the state, and the Department of Environmental Protection announced that long before they actually enacted it, and so they really did a lot of good communication and created or helped create facilities that would be able to manage the compost that was going to be generated from businesses. In our case, we actually had our program fully implemented way before the land ban actually kicked into effect, but I think it's been very effective in Massachusetts.
Thank you. Stephanie, there's a request here. If you could just recap again the difference between a waste audit and a zero waste audit.
Sure. So the focus on a waste audit, which is important, is to go through your trash bin and your recycling, your composting, and make sure everything's in its proper bin with the ultimate goal of getting everything out of your trash bin. A zero waste audit, number one, includes surveying and observing what your employees are doing, and then also looking at the bins at each different department or generation area. And that's actually, little hint, it's a much easier way to do a waste audit than going out to the big dumpsters. But the goal is to look at each individual material and figure out a way to reduce it, reuse it, source separate it, therefore turn it into a commodity, or redesign it, or refuse it.
We have a couple of people that actually asked this question in a similar fashion, and I'll just kind of restate it. Anybody can answer this question. How does eating a diet that is higher in plant-based foods help with the food waste challenge and the environmental impacts of food in general? Anybody?
Well, I was going to say, UREST actually has a pretty good program where they track how sustainable each food product is, and it we'll peg, red meat is one of the worst foods. And I know they have actually Mark can probably speak about that more than I can, but they have a program that they actually are able to run and determine like a food print, like a food waste print, I think, for each food waste to determine the whole environmental impact of that.
Yeah, it's on so we call it a carbon food print. Yeah. And what we do is we track the different what we're purchasing in the business. It also tracks when we turn ovens on, when we turn ovens off, to track that part of the impact of we call it carbon footprint. But yeah, so Brian's right. If you're using red meat, the carbon footprint is much higher. When you're using seafood, vegetable-based items, it's much lower. But that doesn't really answer your question on the backside. And I really don't know what the impact would be on the backside.
Okay, I'll ask one more question for anybody that wants to answer it. A lot of food gets thrown away because of confusion over date labeling. What is going on with date labeling at the state and national level?
So this is Elaine, because we've looked at this issue a little bit here in the state of Oregon, and actually I believe the state of California recently passed some legislation pertaining to trying to clarify date labeling in their state. I also know that the Grocery Manufacturers Association, together with the Food Marketing Institute, earlier this year rolled out a simplification of date labeling as a voluntary program for businesses across the country. The real notion is that date labels there has not been any standardization around date labeling, and there's a notion that consumers may be confused by date labels and may be throwing out food before it's actually gone bad, because out of an abundance of caution and looking at date labels. What we've actually found during some of this early research here in the state of Oregon is that while, yeah, there may be some issue around date labeling, it may not be as bad as we thought. And in our qualitative and actually also our quantitative survey, we found that most people are using date labels at point of purchase. They'll look at a date label and they'll say, okay, this looks like a fresher product than this other one that has a different label on it. And that date labels really come into play for consumers at home when they think about whether or not to discard food on some high risk and highly perishable materials such as meat.
Well, thank you very much for that. Thanksgiving is nearly upon us, so we are very grateful to our speakers, Elaine, Stephanie, Brian, and Mark, for sharing their insights into how you can prevent food waste upstream, save resources, and get a return on your investment by using a source reduction approach. We appreciate your joining this month's SMM Web Academy and invite you to go to epa.gov/SMM to register for our December 14th webinar entitled Technology Innovation, Reducing Food Going to Waste, featuring speakers from Food Maven, Feeding America, and Spoiler Alert. Please make sure you complete our evaluation form, and as I mentioned, we do plan to post the recorded webinar in about 2 weeks to epa.gov/SMM. This concludes today's session. Goodbye.